Hey everybody, what can Daniel chapters 8 and 9 tell us about the coming of Jesus? Welcome to The Lamp, illuminating your way with the light of God's Word. I'm Tom Stone, and if you are the first-time viewer, welcome. If you're a regular viewer, welcome back. If you want to know what the Bible clearly says about your life, then subscribe to this channel and hit that bell notification. If you're not ready to do that yet, I've put little reminders throughout the video, so if you say to yourself, I like this, then hit that bell notification and that subscribe button. In this video, we're going to be talking about Daniel chapters 8 and 9, where we finally get a time prophecy in the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 2, we saw this image that represented this timeline of Earth's history, all the way down to the coming of Christ and his kingdom being established on earth. In Daniel chapter 7, we see a timeline as well represented by beasts, all the way down till thrones are established and the kingdom is given to the people of God. Now in Daniel chapter 8, we have another timeline represented by more beasts, more horns, with more information. Now we've gone from basic all the way now expanded. What does Daniel chapters 8 and 9 have in store for us? Let's start out at the beginning. Daniel says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. So right away, Daniel links chapter 7, his vision that he had at first of these beasts, with Daniel chapter 8, another vision he had with beasts. So Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 8 are all linked together, where God starts basic and then he expands, he repeats and expands again. In his vision, Daniel's in Shushan, he's on the canal of the Ulai, and he sees this ram with 2 horns. One horn is higher than the other. Okay, here we go with beasts again and horns. What do beasts represent? Kingdoms. What do horns represent? Kings. We already know this because we see it in Daniel chapter 7, and now in Daniel chapter 8 we see it again. Not only that, but we have an interpretation a little later on in the chapter. Let's go there now. The angel interprets to Daniel and says, the ram which you saw having the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. After this, Daniel sees a swift goat with a giant horn in between his eyes. He attacks the ram, and then he grows great himself. Okay, we would expect that this beast would be another kingdom, right? And this horn would be another king. And it is. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Daniel keeps looking, and this horn is broken off, and in its place 4 conspicuous horns arise, and we can know what these are too just by looking at the interpretation that the angel gives. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. Notice here that this first kingdom and this second kingdom are represented by beasts, but now you've got these horns, and they're also here called kingdoms, not just kings. Well, it kind of makes sense, right? Well, you can't have a king without a kingdom. What good is a king if he doesn't have a kingdom? What good is a kingdom if it doesn't have a king? And it's easy to interpret them as Alexander the Great's 4 generals that came up after his death. Just like we saw the leopard with 4 heads, these 4 horns push towards the 4 winds of the earth, north, south, east, and west. Now the next thing we read is that a little horn comes out of one of them. And when you're reading in English, it's easy to assume that this horn comes out of one of the 4 horns that came before it. But when you look at the Hebrew, it helps clarify that it's not coming out of the horns. Let me explain. In the Hebrew language, the grammatical gender of this noun, horns, is feminine. And these horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. In Hebrew, the grammatical gender of winds is common. It can either be masculine or feminine. So in Hebrew, there are three grammatical genders. There's feminine, there's masculine, and there's common. Common can be masculine or feminine. And this will help us know where the little horn came from. Because the very next verse tells us that out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great. So we've got ourselves two nouns and then a pronoun. So you've got the horns, feminine. You've got the winds, which is common, so it can be either masculine or feminine. And then we've got out of one of them. This pronoun is referring to one of these two nouns. Since it's masculine, which one does it refer to? The feminine horns or the masculine winds? It has to refer to the winds. So this helps us find clarity that this little horn that we're talking about is not coming out of the Grecian Empire. It's not coming from one of the four generals' kingdoms of Greece. It's coming from outside of them. It's coming from one of the directions of the four corners of the earth. So we read that out of one of the four winds came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. This little horn changes right here and magnifies itself against God as well. This little horn fits with the little horn of Daniel 7. It's boastful, it's blasphemous, it speaks against God, it wars against God. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. This is very similar language to chapter 7. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily, and he cast truth to the ground. He did all this and prospered. So we see this power. It's obviously a political power because it's pushing in on this Mediterranean world to the north, south, the east, and the west. It's conquering and it's exceedingly great. And then it morphs and changes into this religious power as well, where it's warring against God. This is just like Daniel chapter 2, where we see the statue with these legs of iron, and they morph into these feet of iron and clay. In Daniel 7, we see these beasts, and we see Rome represented by this hideous beast. And then we focus in on these horns, and then we focus in on this little horn. And even though it's a part of the Roman system, it somehow morphs and changes. So we already know that this ram is the Medo-Persian Empire, clearly stated through the angel. This goat represents Greece. The horn is the first king. The four horns are these four kingdoms that come up after it. And then it only makes sense that this horn, this little horn, would be Rome. We've already seen this timeline in Daniel 2. We've seen it in Daniel 7. Now we're seeing it again, linked specifically from the very beginning of the chapter, that this is a vision like the one in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel 2, Rome follows Greece. In Daniel 7, Rome follows Greece. In Daniel 8, Rome follows Greece. It only makes sense. After this, Daniel heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, "How long will the vision be concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?" Now, are we ready to answer part of our question? What can Daniel chapters 8 and 9 tell us about the second coming of Jesus? Here we have a time prophecy, and we're going to get some sort of time. And he said to me, "For 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed." So here's the beginning, the first piece in our puzzle for our time prophecy. 2,300 days. We don't know where the starting point is. We don't know where the ending point is, but we know what will happen at the end. The sanctuary is cleansed. Now, it's a common understanding among many Bible scholars that a prophetic day equals a literal year. And this idea of a day-year connection is not obscure or odd in the Hebrew mind. Take Genesis, for instance. Genesis chapter 5, we have this lineage of Adam's family, and we see that the days of Adam were 930 years. We see that the days of Seth were 912 years. We see the days of Enosh were 905 years. So this doesn't tell us that we can take 2,300 days and interpret it into years. That would be silly. But the idea in the minds of the Hebrews that days and years are connected is not lost on us. There are prophecies specifically from God connecting a prophetic day with a literal year, such as when the children of Israel went into the land of Canaan for 40 days, they came out and said, "We can't do it. They're too big. It's too hard. We're too weak." And they were sent into the wilderness for 40 years. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. So here we see that God specifically himself uses this day for a year principle. He does it again through Ezekiel when Ezekiel is prophesying to the children of Israel. God says to Ezekiel, "Lie also on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the numbers of the days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I have laid on you the years of their iniquity according to the number of the days, 390 days, so you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when you have completed them, lie again on your right side, then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year." So here we have two examples of God specifically himself using this day for a year prophetic principle. Can we do that with our 2,300 days? Can we interpret that as literal years? Wouldn't it be nice if we had something in Daniel itself that told us that we could use a day for a year in this interpretation? Wouldn't it be nice if we had something right in these companion chapters of Daniel 8 and 9 to tell us that this time prophecy is in years, not just in days? We do. In Daniel chapter 9, we have a clear representation that this time prophecy that Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 8 and then is interpreted in Daniel chapter 9 is a long period of time over years and years, not just days. In Daniel chapter 9, the angel is continuing to interpret this vision that Daniel had in Daniel chapter 8. And this is what we read. "O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill and understanding. Therefore consider the matter and understand the vision." Now, what vision? The vision that he had in Daniel chapter 8. Here's a part of the time prophecy. 70 weeks are determined, or in Hebrew that's like saying cut off. They are set apart for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Scholars all over the world understand that the anointing of the Most Holy is the baptism of Jesus Christ, the Holy One, when he was baptized in his 30th year of life. So, if this is the case, then this period of time, this 70 weeks or 490 days, can be translated as 490 literal years. If that is the case, and this 70-week period is cut off from the 2,300 year period, then they must both be years. They must both go together. Where else is this 70-week being cut off from? The only place it could be cut off from is from this 2,300 day period or 2,300 year period that's already been given to Daniel in the vision that the angel has come to give him understanding about. So it is safe for us to say that these 2,300 days are 2,300 literal years. And we can see this not only in the writings of Moses, not only in Ezekiel, but also in Daniel chapters 8 and 9 itself. So what can Daniel chapters 8 and 9 tell us about the coming of Jesus? We saw in Daniel chapter 2 a really basic outline of Earth's history. Then we see in Daniel chapter 7 an expanded version of Earth's history where more was given, and you can find that in a previous video. Now we see in Daniel chapter 8 and 9 that God does it again. He expands this out, and this time he does it with a 2,300-day period of time. Somewhere this starts and somewhere this ends, but it ends before the coming of Christ, before God's kingdom is established. As of yet, we have two time prophecies. One is 2,300 years, one is 490 years. We don't know yet how they line up. We don't know yet where they begin. All we know is that one is cut off from the other, that the 70-week period of time is cut off for the children of Israel, and at the end of the 2,300 days, that the sanctuary will be cleansed. What does all this mean? When will it happen? We don't know from chapter 8 alone, and neither did Daniel. Daniel was told that the vision of the evenings and mornings, this would be the 2,300-day period of time, which was told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. The things that are happening in Daniel chapter 8 are an expansion of the things that happened in Daniel chapter 7. The things that happened in chapter 7 are an expansion of what happened in Daniel chapter 2. So how do we understand what happens in Daniel chapter 8? We understand some of it, but Daniel grew weak and he fainted and wasn't able to understand fully the vision. And he won't understand it fully until Daniel chapter 9.